that matter that the Macias Consulting Group was reviewing in terms of hardship and what was happening with internal auditing and control procedures that really caused you to be asked by OPSC whether or not they should enter into agreement to have a review. We cautioned at the time, saying we had concerns about what was being asked because it appeared that there was a target of the hardship program. This review that was done went beyond the hardship program. And I agree with you, Senator, that Senator Lowenthal, that there is a lot of negative in this report. Going back to our original discussion with the consulting group, we found them to be non-listeners. We found them to not understand construction issues. And so we had a natural difference of view that was really pretty tense at various times. So when this second report on hardship was being asked to be reviewed by finance, and our cautions were there, we didn't really know what was going to happen, but we believed it was coming back only on the hardship program. Am I not being clear, Mr. Sheehy?
I didn't want to interrupt you, but you lost me completely. What does finance asking for a report have to do, and hardship have to do with what we just
Because it was germane to the review of what was happening within OPSC and these really wimpy audit procedures that have been identified. And
okay.
so what I'm saying to you is that we object to this report, and we believe, and you and I had a conversation last evening about a recent meeting at OPSC on audits, and we understand where all of the information that came to us during that meeting, which was about 2 weeks ago, and it's rooted in what's being recommended here. So we have a fundamental divide.
Tom, just so I know, since you're here and you're on the record,
yes,
is it Cash's position that you object to this entire report?
We do.
I think that's most unfortunate.
We do not object to being transparent and making sure that we're all accountable.
You may want to double check with your membership, because I'm sure the membership of the Coalition for Adequate School Housing doesn't want to send a message to the general public that they don't support transparency and good controls in state bond funds. I just think that's a message you don't want your organization you're representing.
We do.
And Mr. Savage is here. Maybe he'd like to comment on that. I just think that's a bad message.
If I may just finish.
Sure.
The difference in view is that there was an agreement back in 1998 that brought about Senate Bill 50, and that agreement identified that once you qualified for funding, that funding was to be given to you, and you could not come back and ask for more. You know the story. But that the same was true with regard to the state. So we agree that we need to be transparent with the public, because we get audited in school districts every year. And those audits are done before a board, and those boards are frequently very critical. And we have a public that oversees what we do, and we have citizen oversight committees. We believe that there are issues that are not really issues for school districts that come out of the executive order, and that has been really, Mr. Sheehy and members, what has been told to us to be the impetus for this, and in fact the authority. And we don't agree with that.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Well, just one other thing. The comments that were made about the board at the Little Hoover Commission are something that I think need to be addressed. We were at that Little Hoover hearing. We had given testimony through our cash chair. We have letters that, or a letter that's on the record, and what we identified was we think that this body actually functions very well. And we saw what was happening at the Little Hoover Commission, and there was clearly a bias against having elected officials on a body like this. I don't remember the gentleman's name. He was from Berkeley, but he said there is no other body in the United States that functions like this, where there's an elected official that gets to be on a board, and I think the term was to get a second bite of the apple.
Of course, Tom, the odd thing about that statement you're making is that there's elected officials that serve on the Little Hoover Commission, and they approved that unanimously. So I think you need to put that on the record too, Tom.
Well, it may be the members that were there, but I know one who, after the vote was taken, disagreed with what had occurred.
Fair enough.
He's no longer in the Senate, and you probably know who I mean. But we do feel that this is a biased report as well.
Okay. Thank you. Tom, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
This is the first time, Mr. Chairman, that you and I have disagreed on a fundamental issue.
You know that I'm a big fan of yours. I just think you're wrong in this case. But you know, sometimes people disagree.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Is there more public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we're not going to. I think we've covered all of the business items. Members, we're not going to adjourn, but if anybody would like to leave, they can. I promise to keep the meeting going so that we could take testimony on seismic. And also, Lisa, if Senator Lowenthal wanted to add on to any of the items, could you please make sure he has a chance to do so before he steps out? Okay. So I think Terry Tao was next in line on seismic. Mr. Tao. Thank you. Hey, Senator.
I apologize. I realize late hour, and I'll try to be brief. One of the things about AB 300 was it was supposed to be a private report for research and analysis purposes. Unfortunately, and not through any actions of OPSC, it was released and is generally a public document. My firm represents roughly 350 school districts, about a third of the school districts in the state, so we regularly receive telephone calls inquiring, what do we do about the AB 300 report? What do we do about seismic? Do we qualify for seismic funding? And the issue that I bring before you is there are two bars to seismic funding. One is the ground motion item, and the other is the building type, essentially a redefinition of most vulnerable category 2. I realize that this board is a policy-making board, and there are reasons for various policies. I don't object necessarily to, for example, setting ground motion at whatever it is that you set the ground motion at because of the limited funds. The concern really is the redefinition of most vulnerable category 2, because that is a definition. And there are, if I'm not mistaken, either 28 or 30 building types that would fall under most vulnerable category 2, yet it's been defined into 4 categories, of which really only 2 are viable categories. The other 2, there are literally almost no buildings left that fall into the unreinforced masonry or tilt-up building structure categories. When I'm dealing with school districts, they ask me about their liability, and they're especially interested in the personal liability of school district board members. It falls under Government Code Section 830.6, and they're going through this process right now. For those school districts that were brave enough to say, to go beyond the, I don't want to hear about it, since we're not going to qualify for seismic, let's pretend this conversation never occurred, and are processing applications or trying to process through DSA, there's a very significant liability problem for anybody that was on the AB 300 list. They are identified as potentially and likely unsafe structures, and in most of the school districts, that many of which will remain nameless, they're finding that they are unsafe structures. And most of them are barred both by the seismic criteria and barred by the type of category of building. The problem really is the course that 830.6 sends them on. First, they need to analyze the costs in order to correct the problem. Then they need to seek all available funding. Under Attorney General opinions and application of the law, one of the things they must do is seek funding from your board. And if they seek funding from your board and are turned down, essentially design immunity reattaches so that the individual members of the school board are no longer liable for their acts as long as they do one thing. And the one thing is a very unfortunate thing, but it is placement of a sign on the buildings identifying that it's on the AB 300 list and likely is an unsafe structure if they can't fund, if they can't replace the structure.
If I may, Terry, in the interest of moving the item along, So because staff is going to relook at this, they're relooking at the categories, correct? That was one of the directions that was given. Do you have any input on that? And if so, that's probably the best place to provide that as we regroup on that agenda item. Whatever your recommendations are for the staff and to consider, I think is what you should
I actually am prepared to do that also. There is a school district that specifically asked me to go on record here. It is Morongo Unified School District. They are in the process of meeting with DSA in order to get concurrence letters. They have a school, Joshua Tree Elementary School, that happens to have a ground motion of 2.2. Not 1.7, but 2.2. They do not qualify under any of your criteria for building type. And that is disturbing because we had to tell them, you're not going to qualify for funding, but you should try to seek funding anyway.
So are you saying, Terry, that they would not have, under an even expanded building type potential, there's no building type?
They would have to qualify under a building type other than the 4 that you've identified.
Okay, but we're asking staff to look at the other all building types. I believe that is what the direction of the board was to staff, and why Senator, and I think I called her Assembly earlier, and I apologize for that, Chuck. It's that
okay, Ms.
Brown. That's the direction that we're seeking. So any input that district and yourself, I think, can give to staff in this intervening month will be helpful as the board deliberates this at the next month.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt just for 1 second? I just wanted to ask if you're going to testify when the item comes up again. And I'm just asking the question because I really need to go, but I want to hear your testimony. But if you're going to testify again, then that would free me up.
I very much would. As the school districts are making it through DSA, the individual school districts will probably be mentioned and identified and addressed individually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At the next meeting, you're saying?
And we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Terry, did you have more?
No, that's actually it's building types.
I apologize for making you pause and come back, but thank you for waiting. Thank you for your public comment. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank OPSC staff and leadership for bringing this item. It was actually here last month. We didn't get to address it. I appreciate the movement that's in there on the 2 items that are dealt with. We believe that the dialogue needs to go further. And so we have a letter that has gone to you, and the letter basically identifies, you're a busy guy, so it's probably waiting in your office, but I have a copy here.
All right.
And basically the letter identifies that we're bringing a work group together on this topic, and we'd like to invite OPSC, DSA, the Seismic Safety Commission, to come into basically the discussion of, and this would be with structural engineers and architects, school district folks that do this work, to have a dialogue about what could really work with the areas that we've identified. And we identified the building types you've been talking about, the spectral acceleration thresholds, and the issue of the pipeline. The pipeline that's identified in the write-up is a pipeline basically of unfunded approvals up to the 199.5. What we were asking for was what happens after the exhaustion of the 199.5 and the establishment of a pipeline for future bonds, and what to understand it. You're shaking your head, Mr. Harvey, but the idea is to say how much need is there going to be?
Tom, one thing I think we should probably get on the record right now. There is strong concern in the legislature as well as in the Schwarzenegger administration about the state taking on additional liability in this area. So I just want you to understand that when you feel pushback, it's not just going to be coming from Mr. Harvey and I, but there are a lot of concerns in the Capitol in general on this issue. Now that said, I've committed, and I still am committed, to doing everything we can to get the $199 million out that's been approved. But when we start getting into issues that go beyond that, into additional state liability, we're going to run into a buzzsaw. And I just think you should be aware of that, because the state of California doesn't have additional funds, and we have to be extremely careful about the liability issues that we could be stepping into. And so I just want to make sure, I want to get that on the record right now, and I want to make sure that you and the organization you represent are aware of that.
And I appreciate you doing that, and indeed I do, going back to the conversation we had yesterday about pushback on a bond altogether. What I was trying to differentiate, though, was what we'd asked for and what's in the report, and so that's identified in the letter. But again, our intent is to try to come to a solution. The term, you've used it and it's been used tonight about this being a transparent process. The way that this came together was not done that way at all. 3 agencies came together. We don't know all the information that they put together and how all of that was reviewed. And maybe some of it was out there before the IMP committee. What we want to do is begin with the IMP committee recommendations.
I'm sorry. I want to, if it's okay, I'll wait if you want me to. But I'd like to address the transparency issue straight up. You want me to wait, or should I do that now?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for raising that as an issue. I think that's an important issue, and I think the transparency issue is one that is going to be become more evident when we can actually get the 3 parties you mentioned sitting down, get into the item, have them sit down and testify about it. It was my belief all along that this body, the State Allocation Board, would be reluctant to take action in this area on the seismic retrofit issue unless it was getting a recommendation from an authority. Now, our head architect in this state is Mr. Thorman with the Division of State Architects.
We respect him.
And therefore, I have felt all along and continue to feel it's extremely important that we get a recommendation from the state architect that we can get behind. Now, maybe some people may disagree. Maybe you can have the debate. But I felt that we needed to have an authority, somebody with the credentials and who was a public servant, come forward and make those recommendations. I also knew from conversations that we've had with leadership in the Capitol, in the legislative branch, there's a lot of concern about this issue. Conversations with the Department of Finance staff, that we needed to make sure that we stayed within the $200 million that we have. So we had to have finance staff involved, just more not doing the work, but being a party to it. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to ask them, do you agree with this estimate? I'm always comfortable having our staff look over somebody's shoulder. But certainly you're right. They've got, and I want to just acknowledge what you said before, they don't have any direct line authority in this area. So I did ask them to work with OPSC and the state architect. So to the point on transparency, when we have this item properly queued up before us with all the board members here and we get into it, I'm going to expect all parties to testify on the process they went through, what they looked at, what they considered, what the constraints were that they had. I want there to be complete transparency. I appreciate your point of view right now that you feel like you don't completely understand all that. That's fair. But I just want you to know we're going to have that discussion with this board.
And what our recommendation to you is, because we're going to bring together a variety of professionals, is to basically ask your staff to work with us, bring what they have. We're inviting in DSA and the Seismic Safety Commission, and we want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. This is a very serious and important issue that has been delayed and delayed and delayed. And Mr. Harvey, I appreciated your comments earlier about wanting to get projects on the street and the whole DSA priority matter. If this had been implemented effectively as we had argued for it in 2007, you would have projects that would have been reviewed by DSA and would be funded, and some of this money would have been spent, and not a dime of it's been spent, as you well know.
2 points.
So I think you will have to acknowledge that at one of my first meetings, I became a crusader for removing the obstacles, and we've had hearings on why people didn't apply, because I saw the liability, I saw the risk, and it was my charge and my interest to find out more about why districts weren't using this access point. And so I think we have come a long way, and I look forward to a continued discussion on it. But we are where we are, and we have a ceiling, and we need to make sure we open it up. I'm going to come from the perspective that says we will look at the building type, we will look at the ground shaking, all of those things, depending on what we do, will either put people in or put people out, but we will have a list that at some point will have to stop at $199 million. We can make the case for additional bonds over time.
Well, and
Here,
Ms. Moore.
I just, a couple of comments based upon what you've testified, Mr. Duffy. 2 points and kind of the discussion that's gone on here, and I very much appreciate, Tom, your kind of summary of that, what went on. One point that we're going to want to be very involved in and careful of is that we're not I guess, putting safety behind the numbers. And that is that if indeed the problem is greater than 199, I think that we need to take a careful look at that and not put the policy being driven by the numbers, but the policy being driven by the safety issue as well. Given that we have a cap, we know, but if that cap exists and we still have a safety issue, I'm going to want to hear about that, and I hope that when everyone comes forward and discusses that, I want to have that item, that issue of safety as well. And I'm not saying that all board members are concerned about the safety issue. Secondarily, in the interest of time, Tom, and what we've all said, this has been delayed. Is your group going to meet within this next month and be able to give their input to the Office of Public School Construction?
That's our intent.
Okay, and I would encourage that wholeheartedly so that we can move on with this item and remove some of the impediments that I think Scott has identified.
I would like to add one more thing because you mentioned in the interest of time, and Tom, you mentioned that here we are, we still haven't done it, but we were prepared to act tonight. We had a set of recommendations tonight that I believe, had they been acted on, would have moved us light years away from where we are right now in terms of getting that money out the door. Now, I understand.
It was an important move.
Hold on. Thank you for acknowledging it. I understand that those recommendations perhaps were not as complete as some might like, and I certainly didn't want to push back on any of my fellow board members when they requested that there be an even more thorough analysis and review put together. So I think it's important for the record to show that this body had it in fact teed up, and I know there was at least one board member, probably more, that were ready to take action tonight on this issue. That's a huge victory for you. You should bank it and go home and have a glass of red wine. And the only reason why we didn't, Tom, is because people actually want to put further review and work into it. It's not because anybody's second guessing and saying, oh, we shouldn't have it before this body. So I really think, taking the 10,000-foot view and not being too deep into the weeds, this is really a good thing. I know people are impatient. Sometimes government takes, we got to notice meetings and we got to get back together and we got to do all this stuff. But we'll get there. We're going to do it.
Just finally, Mr. Harvey, you talking about the ceiling. What we're anxious, and this is a final point in this letter, is we're anxious that as these new construction dollars keep burning down with the unfunded approvals, that the seismic money is within that new construction amount based upon the language of 127. We would like you to stop if you look like you're coming down below that $200 million so that you preserve those seismic funds. And I will, I've got some information I can share with you to make sure that you see the view that we have. You've been very patient with me this evening. Was that an offer to buy me a glass of red wine, Mr. Sheehy?
I think we have one more.
No, I
think we have one more.
I think after you hurt my feelings so bad about not liking I shouldn't say about not liking the OSAVE report, I think you owe me a couple of beers, but we'll take that up another point in time. Is there more?
Thank you very much.
Is there more public testimony that needs to come before the board tonight? Okay. Seeing none, the State Allocation Board is adjourned.